Welcome back to The Void Speaks. This is Episode 2 of our series, Uncovering the Darkest Chapters of Medical History. What you're about to hear is not fiction. These are documented events from World War II, real experiments conducted on real people. Experiments so brutal, so inhumane, that the world tried to bury them forever. This is the story of Unit 731 and the frozen experiments. Turn off your lights and prepare yourself, because this actually happened. Act 1, Unit 731. During World War II, in Japanese-occupied Manchuria, there existed a facility known only as Unit 731. Officially, it was a water purification unit, a harmless military installation. In reality, it was a biological and chemical warfare research center and a laboratory for human experimentation on a scale the world had never seen. Led by microbiologist Shiro Ishii, Unit 731 conducted experiments on prisoners of war, Chinese civilians, Russian soldiers, Korean prisoners, men, women, and children. They called them logs, not patients, not subjects, not even prisoners. Logs, because to the researchers of Unit 731, these people were not human. They were raw materials, test subjects for experiments that defied every moral and ethical boundary. Over 10,000 people died in Unit 731, and one of the most horrifying experiments they conducted became known as the frozen experiments. Act 2, the research. The Japanese military had a problem. Their soldiers fighting in Manchuria and other cold regions were suffering from severe frostbite. Thousands were losing fingers, toes, entire limbs to the extreme cold. The military wanted answers. How cold could the human body endure? How long could someone survive in freezing temperatures? And most importantly, how could frostbite be treated? Shiro Ishii saw an opportunity. In the winter of 1940, he began a series of experiments to answer these questions. But unlike normal medical research, Ishii didn't use volunteers. He didn't use animals. He didn't use cadavers. He used living prisoners. The experiments were simple in concept, horrifying in execution. Prisoners would be taken outside in the dead of winter, Manchurian winter, where temperatures dropped to negative 20 degrees Celsius, negative 4 Fahrenheit. Their arms or legs would be exposed, left bare to the elements, and researchers would simply wait for the flesh to freeze solid. Act 3, the procedure. The procedure was always the same. Prisoners would be forced to stand outside. Guards would periodically douse their exposed arms or legs with cold water to speed up the freezing process. The researchers would watch, take notes, measure the time. They documented everything. The exact temperature, how long it took for skin to turn white, how long until the flesh became hard as wood. One survivor testimony describes the sound. When a researcher would tap on the frozen limb with a stick, it made a sound like tapping on a block of ice. The prisoners were conscious through all of this. They felt their flesh freezing, felt the blood stop flowing, felt the tissue dying. And when the researchers decided the frostbite was severe enough, the real experiment began. Treatment. But not treatment to save the limb, treatment to see what would happen. Act 4, the treatments. The researchers tried everything. Some prisoners had their frozen limbs submerged in hot water. The extreme temperature change caused the flesh to literally fall off the bone. Others were placed near open fires. The tissue would thaw, then cook, creating a nightmarish combination of frostbite and burns. Some had their frozen limbs simply left to thaw at room temperature. The gangrene that followed was documented in excruciating detail. One particular experiment involved comparing different thawing methods. 3 prisoners, same level of frostbite, 3 different treatments. Prisoner 1, hot water immersion. Result, flesh separated from bone within minutes, died from shock. Prisoner 2, gradual room temperature. Thawing, result, severe gangrene, amputation attempted, died from infection 3 days later. Prisoner 3, no treatment, left to see what would happen naturally. Result, documented for 2 weeks as the tissue turned black, then green, then began to rot away while the prisoner was still alive. The researchers took photographs of everything. Detailed medical photographs, close-ups of the damage, the progression of the tissue death. These photographs still exist, locked in archives, too disturbing to ever be made public. Act 5. The children. The most horrific aspect of the frozen experiments was that Unit 731 didn't discriminate by age. Children were subjected to the same procedures. One documented case involved a 3-year-old girl. The researchers wanted to know how quickly a child's smaller body would freeze compared to an adult. They took her outside, exposed both her arms, doused them with water. The notes from that experiment still exist. Cold, clinical, detached. Subject's smaller mass resulted in faster freezing time. Tissue became solid in 47 minutes compared to average adult time of 63 minutes. The girl survived the freezing. She did not survive the thawing treatment. Her arms were submerged in hot water. The thermal shock killed her within an hour. The researcher who conducted the experiment noted, smaller subjects appear less tolerant to rapid rewarming procedures. Further testing recommended. There was no further testing on that child, but there were other children. ACT 6. The justification after the war, when confronted with evidence of these experiments, Shiro Ishii and his researchers offered a defense. We were trying to save Japanese soldiers. The research was necessary for military medicine. But the evidence tells a different story. The experiments had no scientific value. The methods were crude. The documentation was sloppy. The treatments were clearly designed not to cure, but to cause maximum suffering for observation. One researcher, in a rare post-war interview, admitted the truth. We wanted to see what would happen. We had absolute power over these people. We could do anything. So, we did. The frozen experiments weren't about medicine. They were about satisfying curiosity through the deliberate infliction of suffering. And when the war ended, the researchers faced no consequences because the United States wanted their data. ACT 7, the deal. In 1945, Japan surrendered. Unit 731 was quickly dismantled. The facility was destroyed. Evidence was burned. But the researchers were not punished. Instead, they were given immunity. The United States, particularly the American Biological Warfare Program, wanted the data from Unit 731. Years of human experimentation. Thousands of detailed records. Information that couldn't be obtained any other way. So they made a deal. Shiro Ishii and his lead researchers would hand over all documents, all photographs, all research notes. In exchange, complete immunity from war crime prosecution. The deal was made. The data was transferred. And the researchers walked free. Shiro Ishii lived until 1959. He died of throat cancer at age 67. He never spent a single day in prison. None of them did. The victims of Unit 731 received no justice, no acknowledgement, no memorial. For decades, Japan denied Unit 731 even existed. It wasn't until the 1980s that the Japanese government finally admitted the truth. But by then, all the perpetrators were already dead. ACT-8, the legacy. Today, the site where Unit 731 once stood is a museum, the Museum of Evidence of War Crimes, by Japanese Army Unit 731. Inside, you can see some of the equipment used, the incinerators, the dissection tables, the jars that once held specimens. But the most disturbing exhibits are the photographs, black and white images of the experiments, the frozen limbs, the frostbite progression, the victims. There are rooms in that museum that tour guides warn visitors about before entering. Rooms containing evidence so graphic, so disturbing, that many visitors cannot finish the tour. The frozen experiments are among the most documented of Unit 731's atrocities because the researchers were proud of their work. They took meticulous notes, detailed photographs. They wanted to publish their findings. And in a twisted way, they did, just not in the way they intended. Those photographs now serve as evidence, proof of what happened, proof that cannot be denied. Outro. This was Episode 2 of Uncovering the Hidden Horrors of Historical Medical Experiments. Unit 731 conducted hundreds of experiments beyond the frozen tests, vivisections without anesthesia, biological weapon testing on living subjects, forced disease infections. It represents one of the darkest chapters in medical history, a reminder of what happens when science operates without ethics, without oversight, without humanity. The victims of Unit 731 deserve to be remembered, not as logs, not as statistics, as people, individuals, lives stolen by those who claimed to be healers. This is The Void Speaks. Episode 2 is complete. Subscribe for Episode 3, where we'll uncover another buried horror from medical history. Until then, remember the victims.